Did you ever go into a toy store where there are toys from floor to ceiling and feel overwhelmed because you just don't know where to begin or what to choose? I have spent 35 years teaching children, 22 of them in a very disadvantaged area. So to go into that warehouse of memories that I have about these children and choose stories was actually quite difficult. On reflection of all the years with children, they helped me emerge from the shadow of a negative belief I had about me from childbirth. Every single time I found a voice for them, I was actually going deep within me to find a voice for me. But most of all, our challenges in life contain precious gifts. And the challenges I experienced as a child contained the most beautiful gifts of love, empathy, and insight. So I'll go back to the beginning of where I started out. I was the fourth girl born on a farm that had been in the family for over 300 years. And my parents wanted a boy to continue the family name. Now, they were severely disappointed because it was me. And my grandmother actually wrote a letter of condolence. Now, I remember that face, so I can imagine the letter. It is with great sadness I heard of the birth of your daughter Elizabeth. Well, you can beat that one. But the joy of it all was that in the middle of this, I interpreted it as, I need to be the child I thought they wanted. And as a result, I became an approval-seeking junkie. I needed to please them, and so help me God, I was not to disappoint them. And I carried that fear of disappointing people throughout many, many decades. But at 22 years, I married. It was quite normal at the time. And the local doctor, who had been present at my birth, a friend of my parents, and he was a guest at the wedding, whispered in my ear, Liz, he said, you can put the past behind you now. Clearly, he had observed something that, in some respects, I wasn't really aware of. But in Ireland in the early 70s, women had to resign from work on marriage, except for teachers. And I had to do that. But my husband felt very, very insecure about being the sole provider. So he encouraged me to do a Bachelor of Arts degree. And I did. And 2 months after I completed that course, my beautiful daughter Jen was born. And then in later years, it was Helen, James, and Eleanor. They've had plenty of wings now because they're all across the world today. But anyway, after that, it was unusual at the time, but graduates were allowed to do a course in primary education. And I did that. And I spent a year in a primary school. And I felt so stifled in that environment, I couldn't breathe. And it was really, really severely ruled by the Catholic Church. But apart from everything, I knew that I did not have the confidence to be the teacher I really wanted to be. So I left it. And I opened my own preschool. Now, in the preschool, I had the freedom to explore the emotional and the social development of children, and to discover how they learn. And in that beautiful, relaxed environment, I could assess where each child was. And then we could work from there. But what never ceased to fascinate me was the wisdom of little children. And I thought of little Anna as I went through my stories. And her grandmother had just died, and she was very, very close to her grandmother. And she said to me that she was really upset and very angry with her parents because they wouldn't let her go to the funeral. But I'm okay now, she said. And I asked, Anna, what makes you okay now? Well, she said, last night I was looking out the window and I saw Gaga, that was her name for her grandmother, go up to heaven. So I kissed the window and I waved goodbye. You can't get more beautiful than that. But there were other children, and I was down teaching in a learning support room, let's say some years later. And this is where I really feel that we can assume so much. But there was a brother and sister, there were 3 in the room with me, and the little boy said to me, are we really brother and sister if we don't have the same da? So I stopped to think for a second, just paused before answering, when behind me, a child who's meant to have special needs piped up, "Yez all came out the one ma. What are you talking about?" And I thought, holy God, there is the fount of wisdom behind me. She may have had academic difficulties, but by God, she had no shortage of wisdom. But my marriage ended, and I knew I needed to go back into the primary school system in order to be able to support my family. And with great illusions, I went in on day 1, and it was into this stifling room, 38 children in rows, like battery chickens in a coop. And by 11 o'clock, with all my goodwill, I had used up all my material because they had the concentration of a flea. And by 3 o'clock, I was a basket case because I had spent the entire time trying to control them. And thank God it was Friday because I had the weekend to reboot. So I learned one thing very, very quickly on that Friday, and it was, unless what I am trying to teach them is of interest to the children, I can kiss goodbye with being able to get through to them. So I decided on Monday morning I am going to speak about football. So they were delighted. And ultimately we came to the point about contracts. So what do you do with them? Sign them, though. I got. But before you sign them, what do you do with them? There was silence. I said, you have to read them. Because if you don't know how to read them properly, you may not get the money that the other footballers are getting because you can't read them. So I knew suddenly there was an interest in reading. But I wanted them to learn that beautiful song, Grace, that gorgeous song about Grace Gifford and Joseph Plunkett. And they were not going to have anything to do with singing a sissy song, but they didn't know what they were dealing with. I found out that Celtic Football Club, their anthem is Grace, like our Fields of Athenry. So I put it up with they singing, and they sang like canaries. And they had amazing voices. These kids in disadvantaged schools are just unbelievably brilliant at dance and music and art and everything. They are full of aliveness. But I set up a school garden, and it's really with the idea of children with academic difficulties. I wanted them to have an experience of their learning. I knew that if they could experience something, we could talk about it, they could write about it, they had a much better chance of succeeding. And so every day, 2 o'clock, unless it was raining, we went up to that garden. And the local community got involved, Conservation Education Trust. And they sent me this guy called Joe. Now, Joe had been through the industrial school system, and he wanted to give back to the children. He didn't want them to experience what he had experienced. And he said something to me one day up in that garden, and he said, Liz, these children need your skill, not your pity. Well, he blew me away. And I realized in that moment what he was saying to me. you learn how to be a leader. You hear them, you see them, you accept them, and you believe in a future for the children. Do not allow that word disadvantage dim your perception of these children. And so I learned more from Joe, who had come through that industrial system, than any lecturer in either college or university I went to. He knew how to discipline without lecturing, without preaching, without moralizing, without shame. And I learned from him. He was amazing. But it wasn't all roses with them, because I had a particularly difficult class. They had a reputation, I would say, throughout the school. And during assembly, in front of parents and the entire school body, by God, did they live up to their name. And they were on their way back up to the classroom, up the ramp, and I heard one of them say, "She's going to bleed and kill us." And I said, oh, that's my clue. So I went in, and they sheepishly went into the classroom. And they're used to a tirade. They're used to people giving out, so they can cope with that. So I just walked quietly to the door, shut it, and walked quietly back and waited. And I could just feel the tension. And I said to them, I'm not going to ask you about your behaviour or why you behave like this, but I'm going to ask you one thing. I want you to look at your individual behaviour. And I want you to see, what could you have done differently? I don't want to hear one word about what the other fellow did, because they're always great at blaming the other one. Just look at your behaviour. And one lad looked at me and said, "It's too hard to be good. I can't be like that mushroom head over there." I thought, how can I keep a straight face here with them? But anyway, there were two types of behaviour that I was always concerned about. And one of them was the very good child, the one that was trying to please all the time, the one that didn't want to disappoint you, because I knew that, and I knew the trap of that one. And the other was the very challenging child. One was pleading to be heard through niceness, and the other is demanding to be heard. But they were both coming from woundedness. They did not have the language of dealing with emotions, and they both needed it. But society praises one and demonizes the other. But I knew what my job was: to help these children understand that they were loved, that they were accepted, and to help them find the language of emotions. But I never ceased to stop learning from the children. And one day, the local parish priest came in, and one little boy, 9, Barry, said to him, "How do you know there was ever a Jesus?" And the poor man nearly had to be resuscitated. And he diverted the question very quickly to the rest of the class, and the general consensus was that it was in a book. And Barry rocked over and back thoughtfully on the chair, and I knew it was coming. And he said, "But I could say me friend is gay in a book 300 years ago. Does that make it true?" Now, I have to say you could have resuscitated me at that stage, because I realised that Barry actually had the confidence and the effortless freedom to question. And I knew that I still didn't. And it was amazing. But our school garden won a prize. And the adjudicators came down from Dunleary here, and they said, anyone that took that gang up there deserved a prize. With shovels and spades, may I add. But anyway, we were up there. And we had to come down to the town hall here in Dunleary to collect it. And there were lots of other schools from the district who had been successful. And my little gang were actually sitting down waiting to be called up. Now, there was an expression in our family, if somebody had a face on them, she has a nib on her. Well, anyway, one of the more senior teachers came towards me, and she had a nib on her. And the arms folded, and she looked at me, and she said, only the children with the correct uniform are to go up for the prize. And all I could think of at the back of my mind was, I'm a temporary teacher, I have 4 kids at home. But anyway, I could see Danny sitting there, the huge brown eyes of him, the gold earring, the shaved head, the sleeves and tatters. And he said, Miss, them kids didn't dig out the stones. It was me and Paddy. What to do? So her name was called. And I just said, children, we're heading up for our prize. Take a deep breath. Needless to say, they were there for the photograph going this way and that way and all the other ways that they go. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. But every single time I found a voice for those children, I was finding a voice for me. Those children treated me as if I was so good enough for them. I didn't just know I was good enough with them. I'd embodied it in my entire system. Because they helped me have fun teaching, they helped me stop and listen to them. But in finding a voice for them, I found a voice for me because I needed to speak up to them and speak up for them. And they were amazing. They helped me find the lost leader within me because I loved and valued them so much. Working with those children in that disadvantaged area for 22 years was the joy of my life. But on my final day there, I was packing up and I noticed little Glenn coming down the corridor. And as he got close to me, he just said to me, guess what these are for? And I knew I had made a difference. Because you see, those children were my spiritual teachers. And I certainly emerged from the shadows by my experience with them. Thank you.